Just sleep it off." Those words, so casually thrown at me, still echo in my mind. I was 9 months pregnant, my body drenched in sweat as I lay helpless in our suffocating 105-degree apartment. My husband, Niall, stood over me, cold and indifferent, forbidding me from turning on the air conditioner because, in his mind, keeping me and our unborn child safe wasn't worth the extra cost on the electric bill. I had collapsed from heat exhaustion, my vision blurring, my strength failing. I begged him to take me to the hospital, to do something, anything, but he just scoffed. Then, as if my suffering were nothing more than an inconvenience, he packed his bags and left on a 3-day trip. While I lay there, unable to move or even drink water, he was off enjoying himself, leaving me to fend for myself in the unbearable heat. When he returned, expecting everything to be as he left it, he walked into a home that reeked of decay, a stench so foul it made him gag. But that was just the beginning. He had no idea of the storm that was about to hit him. Niall and I had been married for 5 years. I was 28 when we tied the knot, believing I had found a partner I could trust, someone who truly cared for me. A year into our marriage, we were thrilled to learn that I was pregnant, something we had both wished for. To the outside world, we appeared to be the perfect couple. Even my mother-in-law, who lived nearby but didn't interfere much, was thrilled at the thought of her first grandchild. But behind closed doors, beneath the surface of our so-called happy life, I was drowning. Niall was suffocatingly frugal, not just careful with money, but obsessively controlling. When we were dating, he seemed kind and understanding, always eager to make me happy. But once we got married, that illusion shattered. "Casey, the electric bill is $5 higher this month, and the grocery expenses, up from last time. You're being too extravagant." "What? That's just a normal fluctuation. Prices have been going up everywhere." "Then figure out how to cut back. You're a housewife, aren't you? Use your head." Every month, he meticulously went through our expenses, treating me like an irresponsible child. If I wanted to buy something, I had to ask his permission, and most of the time, his answer was a flat-out no. I felt like I was under constant surveillance, like I had no say in my own home. My world had shrunk into a suffocating box of rules and restrictions. When I found out I was pregnant, I told myself that things would get better. Surely, once he saw our baby, he'd change. I used to work full-time at a large corporation, a job I loved. But early in my pregnancy, I started experiencing severe morning sickness. Hyperemesis gravidarum, the doctor called it, far worse than the usual nausea. I could barely keep food down, my body weak and drained. The doctor recommended I take medical leave until my condition stabilized. That night, I told Niall what the obstetrician had said. He frowned. "Absolutely not." "What? But I can't work in this condition. I'm barely functioning." "If you take leave, that means no salary, right? That's a problem." I was stunned. My health, our baby's health, meant less to him than my paycheck. Desperate, I tried to reason with him. "It's just for a couple of months. HR said I can get sickness benefits." "It's still less than what you normally make. No way." He shut himself in the bedroom before the conversation was even over, refusing to hear another word. That was when it finally hit me. He didn't see me as a person. I was just an asset, a source of income. I had no choice but to keep working, so I convinced my employer to let me work from home. Every day, I pushed through the nausea, battling exhaustion while Niall acted as if nothing was wrong. He never once asked how I was feeling, never once checked to see if I was okay. But the part that infuriated me the most, while he obsessed over my spending, he had no problem splurging on himself. Brand name clothes, expensive hobbies, impulsive purchases. He never denied himself anything. If I pointed it out, he'd explode in anger, sulking for days until I gave up. I started walking on eggshells, keeping my thoughts to myself. I thought things couldn't get worse. I was wrong. By the time I reached my 9th month of pregnancy, summer had arrived in full force. I had started maternity leave and was finally resting at home, preparing for our baby's arrival. But instead of being supportive, Niall was irritated. "The electric bill has gone up since you've been home," he complained one evening. "Well, of course, it's summer. We need the air conditioning. We managed before without using it during the day. Don't turn it on until I get home." I stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. It's over 100 degrees outside." But his decision was final. From that day on, I was forced to endure the brutal summer heat without air conditioning. I considered sneaking it on when he wasn't home, but he checked the bill every month. If he saw a spike in usage, there would be hell to pay. Pregnancy already raised my body temperature, and with the heat wave, my condition quickly worsened. After a week, I collapsed. My body was shutting down, dizziness overtaking me. I had never felt so weak. When Niall came home, I begged him to take me to the hospital. "I can't even stand up. Please, at least let me go tomorrow." "I'm leaving for a business trip tomorrow. You'll be fine." I blinked. "A what?" "A 3-day trip, I told you." "No, you didn't. My due date is so close." "You're exaggerating again," he scoffed, packing his bags. Then, just before walking out the door, he turned back to me. "Don't touch the air conditioning, and don't go to the hospital." Then he took my phone and placed it out of my reach. After he left, I deteriorated rapidly. I was trapped. No way to call for help, no way to cool down, my body barely functioning. The room was unbearable, suffocating, my breaths shallow. I lost consciousness. When I came to, I heard the doorbell ringing. Then, a voice, familiar, urgent, calling my name. My body refused to move, but I willed myself forward, crawling inch by inch to the door. Just as I unlocked it, everything went dark again. That's when my world changed forever. And when Niall returned home, thinking life would continue as usual, he had no idea that his nightmare was just beginning. "Casey! Oh my God, Casey!" A voice, frantic, terrified, shook me from the darkness. I tried to open my eyes, but they felt glued shut, my body too weak to respond. Then a rush of cool air hit my skin, sudden relief washing over me. I was being lifted, cradled in strong arms. A damp cloth pressed against my forehead, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. When I finally peeled my eyes open, I saw my best friend, Ava, staring down at me, tears streaking her face. Behind her, the front door was wide open. My mother-in-law stood frozen in the entryway, horror etched into her features. Everything came flooding back in a blur, the suffocating heat, the way my body had shut down, the helplessness of knowing I was completely alone. And then, Niall, the man who had left me like this, abandoned and defenseless. "Call an ambulance!" Ava yelled, snapping me back to the present. "I'm fine," I croaked, though I knew it was a lie. The moment I tried to sit up, the world tilted sideways. My mother-in-law rushed forward, pressing her palm against my clammy forehead. "She needs help now, don't argue," she said firmly, her usual cold demeanor replaced by something else. Guilt? Concern? I couldn't tell. The next few hours passed in a haze. I was rushed to the hospital where the doctors confirmed what I already knew: heat exhaustion, severe dehydration, and dangerously low blood pressure. But the worst part? The stress had triggered early labor. My baby wasn't ready. Tears burned in my eyes as I clutched my belly, fear overwhelming me. "Please, just make sure she's okay," I begged the doctors, my voice barely a whisper. It was a long, agonizing night. Every second felt like an eternity as they worked to stabilize me, to ensure my daughter had the best chance of survival. And through it all, Ava never left my side, holding my hand, whispering reassurances, even when I felt like breaking. But the real storm was still ahead. When Niall returned from his trip, he expected to walk into the same lifeless apartment he had left behind. Instead, he walked into a battlefield. The moment he stepped through the door, he was met with Ava, my mother-in-law, and my father, all waiting for him, their eyes burning with fury. The second he saw their expressions, he knew something was wrong. "Where's Casey?" he asked, feigning indifference. But his voice wavered. Ava stepped forward, fists clenched at her sides. "She's in the hospital. She almost died. Your baby almost died. And you?" Her voice dripped with venom. "You were off playing businessmen while your wife was suffering." The color drained from his face. She's in the hospital? What happened? What happened?" My father's voice was low and dangerous. "She nearly lost her life because of you." For the first time, Niall faltered. He opened his mouth, then closed it, scrambling for an excuse, a way to shift the blame. But there was no escape this time. My mother-in-law, his own mother, spoke next. "Do you have any idea what I saw when I got here? The smell alone should have told me something was wrong. But when I walked into that room..." She trailed off, swallowing hard. "I found my daughter-in-law collapsed on the floor, barely breathing. Do you even care about that?" He looked at her, stunned. "Mom, it's not like that." "No," she cut him off, steel in her voice. "You don't get to lie your way out of this. You did this." For the first time, reality crashed into him. His carefully controlled world was unraveling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. When I finally woke up in the hospital, the first thing I saw was my daughter, tiny, fragile, but alive. Tears streamed down my face as I held her against my chest. The moment she curled her tiny fingers around mine, something inside me shifted. I knew what I had to do. When Neil finally showed up at the hospital, I refused to see him. It wasn't until the next morning when Ava and my father were in the room that I allowed him in. The second he stepped inside, I could see it in his eyes. The fear. He tried to approach, his expression carefully controlled, but I didn't let him get a word out. "I almost died because of you." My voice was calm, steady. "Our daughter almost died because of you." His mouth opened, some pathetic excuse forming, but I shook my head. "I don't care what you have to say. You don't get to be a part of this anymore." His face twisted in anger. "Casey, don't be dramatic. I'm filing for divorce." The room fell into silence. He stared at me, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "You're not serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." He scoffed, a desperate edge creeping into his voice. "You can't just take my daughter away from me." "You lost the right to call her yours the second you decided our lives weren't worth an extra few dollars on the electric bill." His expression hardened. "You're being emotional. Think about what you're doing." "I have, and I'm done." And for the first time in years, I truly meant it. I wasn't scared of him anymore. I wasn't trapped. I had survived. And now I was free. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Divorce papers were filed, and to my surprise, Niall barely put up a fight. He knew he had lost. My mother-in-law, despite her initial hesitation, sided with me. "I didn't raise my son to be like this," she admitted one afternoon as she held my daughter in her arms. "I failed you both. I should have seen it sooner." But I didn't blame her. The only person at fault was Niall. With Ava and my family's support, I rebuilt my life from the ground up. I went back to work, secured my own home, and for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten: peace. And as I held my daughter in my arms, watching her grow stronger each day, I knew that she would never have to grow up in a home filled with fear, neglect, or selfishness. She would grow up knowing what love truly looked like. She would grow up knowing that her mother fought for her, and that made every battle worth it. The sound of my daughter's quiet breaths filled the dimly lit nursery, the soft glow of a nightlight casting golden hues across the room. As I ran my fingers over her tiny hand, watching how she instinctively curled them around mine, I felt something inside me shift again, deeper, more profound. It had been 6 months since I left Niall. 6 months since I had collapsed on that floor. the weight of his neglect crushing me to the brink of unconsciousness. 6 months since I had finally seen the truth. I had been surviving, not living. The journey that followed had not been easy. Divorce wasn't just about signing papers and walking away. It was about unlearning everything I had once accepted as normal. It was about deconstructing the lies I had told myself, the excuses I had made for him, the guilt that had tethered me to a man who had proven time and time again that he was incapable of love. But most of all, it was about reclaiming myself. Some nights, I still woke up, gasping for air, my body covered in a cold sweat, the shadows of my past creeping in through the cracks of my newfound peace. The memories played like a broken film reel, his dismissive voice, the suffocating loneliness, the moment I realized I was nothing more than an afterthought to him. I wasn't naive enough to believe that leaving would erase the scars. The pain didn't disappear overnight. It lingered, wrapping itself around me in quiet moments, reminding me of the damage that had been done. But there was one thing I had now that I didn't before: choice. I could choose to sit in that pain, let it consume me, define me, or I could choose to build something new. For the first time in years, I focused on myself, not just as a mother, but as a woman. I went to therapy, even on the days when I didn't want to. I forced myself to speak about the things I had buried so deeply, the wounds I had convinced myself weren't worth addressing. My therapist helped me untangle the mess of emotions, the guilt, the anger, the sadness, the overwhelming relief. "You don't have to earn the right to be treated with kindness," she told me one afternoon as I sat across from her, my hands clenched in my lap. "You deserved better long before you ever realized it." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, because deep down I had spent years believing that I had somehow failed Niall, that if I had just been more understanding, more patient, more something, he would have been different. But that was the biggest lie of all. He had made his choices, and I had finally made mine. I started setting boundaries, real, firm, unwavering ones. When Niall demanded more visitation than he was entitled to, I didn't cave. When he sent manipulative messages trying to worm his way back in, I didn't respond. When he acted like a victim, spinning a narrative that painted me as the villain, I didn't defend myself. Because I didn't need to. I knew the truth. And the people who mattered did too. If leaving Niall taught me anything, it was that true love, real, unwavering, unconditional love, had nothing to do with the grand gestures or the words someone spoke in fleeting moments of passion. It was about actions. It was about the people who showed up, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Ava had been that person for me. Through every stage of my unraveling, she had stood by my side, refusing to let me fall apart completely. She never once made me feel like a burden, never treated my healing as an inconvenience. And then there was my father, a man who had spent years believing his daughter was in a happy marriage, only to find out he had been deceived just as much as I had. When he first saw me after the divorce was finalized, he broke down in tears, not out of sadness, but out of sheer regret. "I should have known," he whispered, gripping my hands in his. I should have seen it. But I didn't blame him, because that was the thing about emotional neglect. It was invisible until you lived it. I had spent so long carrying the weight of everything Niall had done, allowing it to chip away at my sense of self-worth, my ability to trust, my understanding of love. But the real battle wasn't about forgiving him. It was about forgiving myself. Forgiving myself for staying as long as I did, for making excuses for him when he didn't deserve them, for believing, even for a second, that I wasn't worthy of more. It wasn't an easy process. Some days I hated myself for ever loving him, for ever letting him have even a fraction of my heart. But then I would look at my daughter, her bright eyes, her innocent smile, the way she reached for me with complete and total trust, and I would remember why I fought so hard to leave. She was the reason. She was the proof that I had made the right choice. 1 year later, I stood in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. Not because I looked different, but because I felt different. I had shed the version of myself that had been small, silent, afraid. I had become a mother who was capable, strong, and unshakable. I had become a woman who knew her worth, who refused to settle for anything less than a love that was whole, honest, and safe. And most importantly, I had become free. Niall still existed somewhere out there, in his own version of reality, spinning his own tale. But he was no longer a chapter in my story, just a distant footnote in a life that was now mine to write. And as I picked up my daughter, pressing a kiss to her forehead, I knew one thing for certain. I would never let her grow up thinking that love was something you had to suffer for. Because real love, the kind that is safe, the kind that is kind, the kind that doesn't leave you begging, was the only love that would ever be worth having. And we would never settle for anything less again.